We all know the saying, you can choose your friends, but not your family. And my goodness, that is a saying I have thought more about in the last, well, my entire life, but that is something I've really, truly, honestly thought about a lot in the last, I'd say, month, because I've had a few conversations with my brother, and we've always had an interesting relationship. And I have been so intrigued and fascinated by the fact that I'm related to him. I cannot believe we share the same set of parents. Well, as far as I know, we have the same mom and dad. And I can't believe we're only 2 years and a week apart. Exactly 2 years and a week apart in age, and we were only a year apart in school, and we went to a small school, so we grew up very close together. All of my friends were friends with his friends. A lot of my girlfriends dated his friends. We were always close together in proximity, but we couldn't be any more different, and we don't think we share a single moral or value. I don't think we share anything. Maybe some things in the sense of humor department. We maybe laugh at certain things. I think we both were in agreement that our mom wasn't such a great person towards the end, but they even had a very different relationship. But with all of that said, I certainly wouldn't choose him or anybody I'm related to for that matter, other than my two kids, to be related to or have as my family. I'm Nikki Lynn Chase, and this is my podcast, Adult Chicken, and it's about navigating life's unexpected. This is my journey. These are my stories about being a single mom to two special needs kids. I've been reluctant to say much about my brother because he was the golden child. He was the favorite kid out of us, and that's not me trying to paint a more exciting picture than I really lived, but it was very, very evident. That kid did everything my parents wanted him to do. He was the ultimate parent pleaser. He was like the Eddie Haskell, if you will, of kids growing up in that day and age. He was a good kid, for sure, but he got away with everything as far as with our parents because he did things that they wanted him to do. I blew the expectations a long time ago with them. It's fascinating to me. We grew up with the exact same parents in the exact same household. So always been a little confused about my feelings for my brother. I love him because we grew up together. And contrary to the story he told me about my parents not liking me and dropping me off and his parents raising me, I am pretty certain we have the same parents. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure we both come from the same mom and dad. And we grew up in such close proximity. We lived in the same house until he graduated and went off to college, which was only a year before I left. So we were really close. And I didn't know different. So I thought we were a very close sibling unit. And it's not true. I mean, he was mean. He was ruthless. I thought anything and everything he ever said or did to me was kind of typical sibling stuff. Now that I'm older, I'm much wiser. And I would never, ever put up with a quarter of the stuff that he did to me. Probably vice versa if my kids ever acted or behaved in the same manner. It was over the top, definitely. And he is it's very obvious to me. I see the combo. I see my mom in him. I see my dad in him. And that's a hard dynamic for me to see in anybody because I can't stand either one of my parents. So to see that combination in this human who is my brother is a very difficult thing for me. And he's got the narcissism that we grew up with both parents. I see that. So he's still the guy that wants to make sure he tries to level me down. If ever he thinks I've got something to say that might sound smart or might outsmart him or might be knowledge that he's not keen to or aware of, then he's got to somehow dumb me down and level me out. And I just find it fascinating because I can sit back and say, wow, how odd we come from the same people, but we're so different. We do not share the same understanding of what life is. We don't see beauty in the same things. I'm not sure he sees beauty at all. And my brother lived a very different life, even though we grew up in the same house with the same parents. He was a kid who was entitled. He was given everything. He didn't have to work for anything. And as much as I didn't appreciate that growing up, and it seemed so unfair and it seemed ridiculous and awful and it made me mad, I'm so eternally grateful I was on the other end. I'm glad I wasn't the one that was given everything, because I think that it did him such a disservice. And I hate to say it, but now I look at my parents and there's a little bit of a nanny boo-boo in that my brother was your investment. You invested very poorly in that one. But I'm also grateful that he was the golden child. And I'm also eternally grateful that they made me work for everything, because it's made my life manageable. It's made me the survivor, I guess, that I am. And that, again, is not to toot my own horn and say, God, I'm a survivalist. My life was not easy. They did not make my life easy. They made sure they made it very difficult. But for somebody whose life was made pretty easy and there were very few struggles that my brother had to go through to get from A to B, there were consequences. And the last time my brother and I spent a significant amount of time together is he had graduated, and there was just that 1 year, because he was only a year ahead of me in school, 2 years in age, again, 1 year ahead of me in school. So he had gone to San Diego. And then I thought, just because I knew him and his group of friends, and I thought I'd be comfortable in San Diego, as soon as I graduated, I went right out to San Diego. Now, he was going to a private college with a little bit of a tennis scholarship, and then completely paid for the rest of his tuition, his housing, everything was paid for, because he did the right thing and went to that university. And it was a private one. It was spendy. And that was the year I was told, well, maybe you can get yourself into community college, figure it out. And I had to work a couple jobs. We lived in the same apartment with his roommates. And I, again, very different expectations. I was working for my rent. I was paying for my own school. It was just community college, so fortunately it was affordable. But I was also an out-of-state student. I didn't have any money, but that was the beginning of my seeing the difference in what life would probably look like. I just did the 1 semester there. And that was the last time we really spent significant time together. That was the last time we ever lived together, was that 1 semester in San Diego. And then the next time I noticed the difference in what would be sort of future forecasting to my life was his college graduation. My mom and dad had been divorced for years and years before that, but everybody flew out to San Diego for his college graduation. I mean, it was an event. Everyone came out for the weekend. It was the event. Up until that time, the biggest event our family had ever had was my brother graduating from college. And I remember we had gone to a dinner with a few of the guys that he was graduating with, and my mom and dad got into the most uncomfortable, epic fight you've ever seen. My mom had at that time become a full-blown alcoholic, and it was undoubtedly one of the most memorably embarrassing times up until then. Things continued to get more embarrassing, trust me, but that was embarrassing. We were at this beautiful, nice, I think we were at a chart house or something, and my mom got into it with my dad. And I remember thinking I was so grateful that it was my brother's event, not mine. Nobody went to my events, but this was my brother's. And I just watched it unfold. I remember the pictures from the next day when he actually walked the graduation, and we all did get together for a family photo. And you could just see the looks on everybody's faces of, oh my God, we all hate each other so much. But life went on. He stayed in San Diego. He had gotten his degree in accounting or finance, and he'd gotten himself a job just as he was expected to do. And then I put myself through college, tried a few more out, ended up at CU Boulder. And then it was time for my graduation. And I didn't want that same awkward blowout fight, but I didn't even have the opportunity to have one of those. No one showed up to my graduation. No one wanted to come. I don't know that my dad was aware I was graduating. He certainly didn't give a shit if he did know. My mom told me she wouldn't come back for my graduation because I didn't graduate in 4 years. Now, granted, I'd put myself through school, but no one was proud of my graduating from CU Boulder, and so I didn't even bother going to my graduation. And then I moved to California and I taught school. But that was not impressive. Nobody thought that wasn't impressive to anybody. And at that time, I had started dating my kid's father. So at that time, in my parents' defense, and that's the only defense I'll give them, that was a terrible choice, and they saw that as my complete and total demise. I like to think of it as a stepping stone to getting myself to where I have gotten myself today. But anywho, fast forward to several years, my brother got out of the finance world and ended up in the tennis business, which was kind of just his calling. He was a good tennis player. And so right around the time I started a family, had my first child, Bootsy, he was making a move to the islands to become a tennis instructor and run a tennis club. And I was thrilled for him. I was thrilled selfishly because I loved going to the Caribbean. I loved it. And we'd grown up going to the Caribbean. I knew a lot of people on the island in particular that he was going to and that he would end up being friends with. And I was thrilled to death to get to go to visit him and to expose Bootsy to the Caribbean life. I loved it for him and selfishly for myself and getting to go travel. And I even liked kind of saying my brother lives in the Caribbean and is a tennis instructor. It made me almost proud. And I know that it certainly did for both of my parents. I wasn't real close with either one of my parents at the time, but I know that their golden child had done something now that they could really embrace and be proud of. And he was the guy that they could really forget the fact that I had a kid. No one in my family wanted anything to do with the fact that I had a child and they had a grandchild, meaning when I say family, I'm talking I had a mom and dad and my brother. But no one was bragging about me, which of course that there was no expectation for bragging about me in my future. But he was the guy that continued to be the kid that my parents could brag about. He's the one that was the tennis guy on the island. And he knew that would impress my parents, and it absolutely did. And there he was, just living the life. I'd get messages from people asking if it was true that my brother was just living this bachelor life in the Caribbean, and it was true. It was very different, I think, than what people pictured or imagined. And even, I think it was a lot more different than my brother's maybe delusional idea of what he was living. And I know it's never as glamorous as it sounds, but his was pretty close, and he was pretty much living life for many years, almost 2 decades, as a matter of fact. Well, fast forward to years later, and again, our relationship was always just up and down. He gave me a safe haven. There was a place for me to go for the month I needed it. When I left Colorado, we went to stay with him, and that was a different kind of Caribbean vacation. That was fleeing from Colorado and just going somewhere on a whim in the middle of the night and landing there and spending a month trying to figure out what I was going to do next with the 2 kids. But our relationship was just he always felt like he needed to be the big brother, the bully, the one that told me how life works and what to do. And it never changed. It just sort of changed in that he took on my mom and dad's role in addition to being the older brother. And it wasn't a role I was okay with. I wasn't okay once I was that much older, personally, being told how life works. We had lived completely different lives, even when we were growing up in the same house. I wasn't in a position where I could hear somebody who lived such a different life than I had lived up until then, and even now, tell me how things should be or how to make decisions or what I should have done or should not have done. He was taken care of, and I was not. And so it was really hard for me when I'd gotten to that stage. I appreciated that he kind of gave me a place to be for a month and figure my shit out, but it was also my shit to figure out, and he wasn't going to be able to do it for me. And again, we just continued, I think, as a lot of siblings do. You agree on some things, you don't agree on others, and the glue that keeps you together is that family apart. Even after having spent a month there, and again, it was a weird month, it was a crazy month, but I saw a lot of his life go on. That was a long time to be with somebody you're related to and love and adore, but you can't really stand spending time with that person, especially when that person represents the two people you really loathe at the time, being our parents. But it just was interesting to see his life. It was interesting to see and capture the moments of, holy shit, we live such different lives, such different lives. Here I've got two special needs kids, and then his life, which was himself, and this bachelor life in the Caribbean. And then we got to Washington and just continued to figure out life as we went, and he continued to do what he did in the Caribbean. Well, years later, and it happened to be the year, it was when my mom passed away, he'd gotten himself into some trouble. I think he took that wanting to live the John Grisham, the firm life, a little too far, and he got himself in a compromised situation. And it was really hard to imagine that this guy, this person, my brother, the one that I've been closest to my entire life, it was in such a horrible situation. It made me feel sick. It made me, things were popping up, but people started to reach out to me because things were popping up on the internet, and I wouldn't read anything. I wouldn't Google anything. I didn't want to know. I only wanted to know what I would hear from him, and then I was very much going to be the person that deciphered what was true, what wasn't true, and there was nothing I could do. It was a very weird position to be in, but he'd gotten himself in quite a bit of trouble, enough trouble to get his passport yanked. He'd been arrested, and that was hard to stomach because if you looked him up on the internet, that's what came up. It wasn't his tennis career. It was getting into trouble, and it made me sad, and felt like, gosh, I wish there was something I could do. And obviously there wasn't. I kept it quiet. I kept it very quiet. And people would reach out. I got a lot of Facebook messages. Is this true about your brother? What's going on with your brother? And lots of different questions. If anybody looked him up, or if somebody was going to travel to where he was, they'd kind of find out what was going on. And the short of the long that I gave them was, well, as we all know, there are two sides in the truth, but yes, he's gotten into some trouble, and who knows? Well, I didn't want my kids to know. When they figured out how Google worked, that was one of the rules, was you can't Google certain people, and my brother was one of them. Please don't, because it's not his tennis career that's going to come up anymore. That's not what he's known for on the internet. And so he got into trouble, and he had to go to what at the time, because I didn't want my kids to hear me say any word that they were familiar with, I would tell people he went to a all-inclusive gated community, which wasn't a lie. He did. He went to an all-inclusive gated community in the Caribbean. So my mom passed away, and my brother, everything was in my brother's name. I don't think I even existed as far as my mother was concerned once she died. I don't think there was a piece of paper where my name, other than maybe my birth certificate, where my name was connected to hers. So when she passed away and I had to unplug my mother, essentially, there's really no way to say that otherwise, so many feelings because I was angry at my brother for being in trouble and my having to deal with this dead mother of ours. Then I inherit her dead body. That's all part of the story. But I couldn't do anything. Everything was such a process. And here I was, because I had signed off on whatever, that's how I inherited the dead body. I'd signed off on paperwork at the hospital when I had to unplug her from the life support. And since my name was not attached, I wasn't really somebody that could do anything, or I didn't have access to anything. It was a very frustrating experience because it was not only expensive, but I'm trying to raise my kids, and I'm trying to manage all of this stuff with this mother I couldn't stand and had no relationship with, and my brother was in trouble. how convenient that you're in all this trouble and you can't come back to the States and help me do any of this, and I have to deal with it. But it also tugged at my heartstrings that he was in trouble and that there was going to be consequences for what he had done, and was going to be tough. He was in another country, and everybody he knew there went their separate ways. Nobody wanted to be connected to him and his situation, and that tugged at my heartstrings. And so I continued to just be very close to him. I was angry at him for so many things that had to do with our family and our life, but especially at this point because my mother had died and I'd been stuck with this whole situation of a dead mother. And they ended up putting my brother in this all-inclusive gated community, and I hated the fact that I worried about my dad, because I knew probably if I ended up somewhere like that, that wouldn't faze my dad. He wouldn't give a shit. But I knew that was going to destroy my dad. That was his golden child. That was his guy. That was the one he invested in for the last almost 50 years. That was the one that was supposed to get him to the Caribbean for his retirement. And his kid went to this all-inclusive gated community, and I worried about my dad. Started sending my dad his favorite candies every week. Amazon sending something like a little treat just to keep his spirits up. At that time, he'd also moved from Vail and stopped skiing, which also concerned me, and moved to Florida. So I felt like at least he was a little bit closer to the Caribbean where my brother was, but I just worried about him. I hated that. My dad didn't ever deserve my being worried about him. He also didn't deserve weekly nostalgic candy, but I sent it to him because I wanted to just keep his spirits up. When my brother went away, I'd hear from my brother, and he never actually sounded so good. I think it was almost a year. I think he really thought about his life. It was like I got my brother back, the one I knew before we were probably drinking beers together, the one that really had this clear sense of our reality. I think he had a lot of thoughts about our parents, and we shared a lot of understanding for the first time in probably 30 plus years. It was really remarkable. It was both difficult and hard. My dad didn't want to talk about it. Of course, my dad didn't want to talk about it, so we didn't. And it wasn't something I wanted to air. I didn't want to tell people what had happened. People would look it up, and people would reach out to me and ask. And I'd say he was doing okay. He actually was doing great. He sounded very, very good every time I talked to him. And then when COVID hit, he came back to the States. They put him on one of the last flights out of the country he was living in, and he arrived, and thank God he arrived in Florida and not California, because I wouldn't have known what to do. So when my brother landed in Florida, I was worried then that it would screw things up for my dad. And it was interesting. I think my dad and I, for the first time ever, bonded because of the situation with my brother. I think it was the unspoken reality of something we both knew. My dad was embarrassed about it. He didn't want to talk about it. He was embarrassed and mortified. It more or less tugged on my heartstrings, and I just thought, God, dang it, like that's not somebody I imagine would do well in that kind of situation. But I knew he was doing okay. I was talking to him. And when he got back to the States, the first few months were pretty good. I felt like, God, I've got my brother back. This is great. He seemed to still really have his head on his shoulders, and I really felt like this is going to work out. I was worried if he came back to California that it would just be too much of him too soon. And we were staying in touch. I think so much had changed. He'd lived in the Caribbean for so long. I think he had a really hard time adjusting to being back in the States. And he didn't want to be back in the States. I think at first he was so relieved to be out of where he was that it was all awesome. When he lived in the Caribbean and had his freedom, he was traveling back to the States a couple times a year. So I think he was getting his fix on American food and fast food and whatnot, things that he missed. But as soon as he got into trouble, there were several years he couldn't travel back to the States, and then he started to miss everything. So when he came back, I think the first few months were just trying to adjust, but really just kissing the ground that he walked on. But it was also COVID, so it was a weird time. But I think he was glad to be back. And I think it was okay living with my dad. They were living together. They're still living together. And then he got into the swing of things. And it's been weird. It's been a few years now that he's been back. And I can't quite figure out our relationship. I think it's more strained than ever now, because I don't understand how, after going through all that he's gone through, there's still such a misunderstanding and misinterpretation of who I am as a person. And once in a while, I will get a phone call that I feel like is my mom and dad together in the worst versions of themselves together in this human's body, and he just calls to make sure I'm reminded of what I grew up with. And he'll just start yelling at me about something, or there's just a total disconnect in the way we view things, what he thinks his position is in my life, I guess, more than anything. Like, dude, you're my brother. You're not my parents. And they were shitty parents anyway. So why would you even want to be them? You grew up with the same parents. They sucked. Okay? Why do you want to be the combination of them? And who the fuck are you to call me and project being them onto me? And so it's very interesting. Again, it's the most fascinating thing to me to think that my brother, now that I'm going to be 50 and he's 2 years older than I am, so he's into his 50s, are literally those same little kids that grew up with those same two horrible parents. And we're just in grown-up bodies. He still is that same mean, nasty, bullying brother that wants to instigate the sibling rivalry. And I'm not there. I can't be there. But we're still the same people with very different lives that we've lived and very different perspectives on life. It's just mind-blowing to think that we share the same DNA, that we grew up in the same house. I'd say with the same rules, but we didn't have the same rules growing up. But we did grow up with the same parents, and we couldn't be any more different. We couldn't have chosen more different paths in our lives. We couldn't have had more different experiences. There couldn't be anything more different. The only thing we still maybe have a smidge bit in common is things that might make us laugh once in a while. But I think even that has completely changed. Our sense of humor, I think we just have a different understanding of what's funny, what's not funny. There is nothing about us that is remotely similar. So with all the unexpected sibling events, I am going to introduce Mr. Sandler Chase for special edition today, who will talk about his sister and what it's like to have a sibling. And I think he shares a very different experience than I did, thank goodness and thank God.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Sandler.
How are you?
Good.
My name is Sandler Chase. I'm the host of Special Edition.
And what is today's episode about?
Siblings.
What is a sibling? Do you know?
Yes, I do.
All right, let's hear it.
Sister of brothers.
Oh, that's exactly right. And you've got one. Mm-hmm. So what I was discussing is I have one.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of explaining my relationship with my brother. Mm. And then I thought we'd change the subject because I know you wouldn't probably want to talk about that one. So can you enlighten us and tell us about your experience with having a sister?
My experience is great. I love having a sister.
Do you guys ever fight?
Sometimes.
And do you love her always? Does she always
annoy me? Yes.
That's not what I said.
Oh, well.
But I was getting at that. Okay, so what do you think life is like with a sister?
I like having a sister. She is very good at watching me. she's really good at sitting down on the car watching me skateboard for 24 hours.
Your sister is probably the most patient
And
human being in the entire planet. And do you always thank her for watching you skateboard? Because you put in a lot of time skateboarding, which means she puts in a lot of time watching you.
yeah.
She's very supportive. And does she ever complain?
No.
Not about that. What are 3 things you wish could change about your sister or your relationship with your sister?
I want the first change. I want her to stop being annoying.
Okay, what would be the second change? If you could change anything.
Stop pinching me.
Pinching you, okay. And what would be the third thing that you would like for her to not be or to stop doing?
Stop giving me attitude.
Oh, she gives you attitude?
Yeah.
Huh. What is that like when your sibling gives you attitude or your child?
If you don't like it, then just ignore her.
Ignore her. Do you do that? Are you good about that?
No.
No.
I'm working on it.
You are working on it, and I appreciate you're working on it. Okay, so since we covered the 3 things you would change about your sister or you would have different, what would be... Sure, you can put your arm around me. I like it. Put my arm around you. Okay, what are the 3 best qualities about your sister?
What do you mean?
Like, what are her best... What do you like the most about having a sister? 3 things.
I like to have a sister because she's funny.
She is funny. You've got a funny sister.
And she's fun to hang out, spend some time with her.
You spend all of your time with her. So I'm glad to hear that some of the time you spend with her is fun. Yes, I think so too.
And I like about having a sister, she likes to do stuff with me.
She does. You guys are pretty good about everything you do. We all do something together because we're kind of a unit everywhere we go.
Or 3.
You want to add a thing?
Yeah.
Okay, the top 4 then.
I like having a sister. I like having a sister because she's funny. She good at making me eggs.
Oh, she is. She likes to. Always say Bootsy's eggs are much better than mine.
Sometimes, the other 3 times you made me egg are good.
Because I microwaved them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now,
Welcome.
On that note, I have to be honest, I think you did better in the sibling department.
Can I tell you
Sure.
something? What do you think about your brother?
I think my brother... Do you want me to answer 3 things?
I do 2.
2 things that I like about him? That might be about all I like about him. Maybe
No.
2 things.
No, change.
Oh, 2 things I'd change?
Oh.
First thing, his whole entire attitude.
Yeah.
Second thing, how he treats me. Okay.
I like about sister, they are just fun to just being around and hanging out with.
All right, Sandler. Well, it is...
Can I do one more thing?
Sure.
And I like to play pool with my sister.
Oh, yes, you guys always play pool together, and you're both very, very good at it. So you have a good friendly competition with your sister on pool games. Well,
Thank you for my sister, my mom, and yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, please tune in next week for an episode all about, you know what I'm going to talk about? You know how you were in the contest, the skate park hero contest? Well, that made me feel a lot of feels because we're not a contest family. We don't really do contests. So I'm going to talk about that next week.
Okay, but I think I'm not going to be in this week, next week, okay?
Well, you are in it this week. Well, you can talk about whatever you want to. It's your special edition. This is your segment of the show.
Okay.
Okay. So please tune in next week for an episode all about Contest Kid.
And please like, share, follow,
Subscribe.
subscribe with your family, uncle, aunt, cousin, mom, dad, family.
Yes. Like, share, subscribe.
And you can find Adult Chicken on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, but
Yes.
YouTube, and everything.
Apple, Spotify, podcasts at Adult Chicken, YouTube, Adult Chicken, website,
Adult Chicken.
yep, adultchicken.com. And then you can also, very much appreciated, our any and all donations. From the smallest amount to the largest amount, everything you donate goes towards production costs. This is independently run, obviously, by myself.
And you can get, if you spend 10,000, you can get a truck out.
You don't have to spend $10,000 on a donation. That's all right. You're just off a couple thousands. It's just anything over $100. Now you can say it.
You can get, if you win, donate $10,000
or $100 and over.
You could get a trucker hat. My mama made it right now.
A trucker hat made by my sponsor, Seagal, SEA Gal. Please look up Seagal, and any and all donations are appreciated. It is to help run this independently managed and produced podcast, and any and all donations are very much appreciated. Okay, don't have a good day.
Have a dope day. Happy Memorial Weekend.
Happy Memorial Weekend.
Love you.